So where are our research findings currently? And it is ever changing. But from a memory cognition perspective, when you take in all the studies, there's not a lot. You'll notice that there's a lot of different measures in each test or each study. But when you look at the overall results of young, older individuals, independent of dosage or duration, there was a significant improvement in memory and or cognitive tasks with creatine supplementation. The dose or the significant value is 0.02, so the probability was adequate to moderate. It wasn't really, really high, simply showing that there is something there for those trying to improve either memory or cognition from an overall perspective. When you
Tremendous. And, if we zoom out to 30,000 feet and look at this from more of an evolutionary lens, it's always interesting when there's a nutrient that's of value to certain tissue.
right.
But like the blood-brain barrier, we have this sort of cap on how much we're taking in. Is this suggesting that maybe we were consuming more of this and therefore we were trying to cap levels, or how do we, square that circle?
Yeah, I love that analogy. I mean, the evolution, not only creatine research, but our eating patterns, it's now we're more focused on plant-based diets, or a lot of people are. And so you're not getting dietary creatine there. And I think that's why the interest in creatine research from the health aspects across the lifespan, from pregnancy to younger individuals, such as children, to older adults. And so maybe it's a compensatory effect of our brain will maintain creatine because it relies on it. We could care less about the bicep or tricep. The brain really needs to have the energy. That little brain that we have takes up 20% of our energy per day. And when we're more metabolically stressed, it uses more. So a lot of us will say, geez, I'm mentally tired. Very rare do we say we're physically tired. That's really drastically. But if you're mentally fatigued, it's really daunting and jeopardizing your performance, no matter how much caffeine you're consuming. And I always use lack of sleep. For those who go through sleep deprivation, the next day and the next 2 days is a train wreck. Nothing seems to be working. You're very lethargic, and the brain is using creatine to maintain ATP. And for all those populations where creatine seemed to work, we're starting to see primarily from animal data that it decreases inflammation or oxidative stress. So if the brain is more of in a healthier environment, maybe that's why it seems to repair, or you can maintain activities such as cognition and memory. This is interesting. When you now look at younger individuals, creatine did not have an improvement on memory or cognition. And this was really, really low probability from having any chance there as well. And we're going to come back to why we think this is, which is in contrast to older adults who had high probability that creatine did improve memory or cognition. So now, do you need creatine through supplementation? The answer is no. It's non-essential from a healthy standpoint because we're naturally producing it, but we can get benefits by having more in the body. So again, if you're an omnivore or a carnivore and you're eating salmon and steak and you're getting maybe a small amount throughout the day, you probably have to drink the entire amount of milk from the Jersey cow to get any viable amount. So that's really not feasible. I'm in Canada. The cost of groceries is astronomical. I think that's worldwide. What about the ethical treatment of animals, your dietary preference? So getting creatine through the diet is a strategy, but I think as times go by, it's getting more difficult. And I think the financial impact is becoming a bigger issue nowadays from a global perspective. To put it into context, and I'll get to dosing a little bit later, but you've probably heard of maybe 3 to 5 grams a day is amount of creatine is what you need. And this chart really does a great job. If you wanted to simply get 3 grams of creatine through codfish, you would need to eat an entire kilogram. That will run you about $20, $25, depending on where you are in the world. Look all the way down to salmon. An entire kilogram of salmon, very expensive. Simply get 4.5 grams. Again, herring is a little bit more from the Scandinavian countries. So you can see here now where fruits and vegetables, trace amounts, obviously, that's based on the non-essential amino acid compound. But these are some of the most popular dietary strategies. So that begs the question, how am I going to get a certain amount more than what we're making that has been shown in evidence-based research to be effective? And that's why I think this is one of the rare compounds where supplementation may need to be considered. I think from a dietary protein perspective, as Jose talked about yesterday, supplementation is a great way to get to the total daily amount, but you can easily get there through food. to get the amount of creatine in the diet may be difficult, and that's why creatine monohydrate may be a more viable source. And from here on in, when I say the word creatine, I'm only referring to monohydrate. If you have
Another question here, is there improved absorption of creatine if taken alongside a high protein carb meal, or does it matter?
Yeah, it does. So it's well documented that carbohydrate and or protein are insulinogenic, so it will stimulate greater creatine uptake into the muscle. For those that don't want sugar or very carbohydrate sensitive, protein is very gluconeogenic, and you're going to get numerous benefits from animal or plant-based proteins. So you can do it from a diet. The other great way is exercise. Prior muscle contractions will unlock those doorways, allow creatine into the cell. So a lot of people say, well, is there a timing to take creatine? Really, there's not an optimal timing. It needs to accumulate. But I always suggest around the close proximity to exercise, when you're doing muscle contractions, it will stimulate doorways to your muscle to open up. We think it's very similar to the bone and potentially increasing blood flow to the brain when you're thinking and things like that. So those are viable strategies, yes. When you do subgroup analysis, depending on the dose, less than 5 grams a day, this is interesting, it was not significant. Simply showing maybe a higher dose may be needed, probably going back to why the brain will make its own creatine and or the reduction of getting in through the blood-brain barrier. When we did a high dose, it was irrelevant again. So overall, when you look at combining low dose and high dose, all we could conclude is that creatine in general had some favorable effects. The creatine supplementation will increase brain creatine stores, but it's only about 5 to 10%. In muscle is about 20 to 40. So again, there's whatever's happening at the blood-brain barrier or in the brain, why is it limiting peripheral creatine from getting from circulation into the precious brain tissue? Total creatine can increase from about 3% all the way up to 14%. And then your phosphocreatine, which is needed to really maintain ATP. Look at this. Some people, when they took creatine, they got a reduction. Other people got a huge increase. So I think what this is suggesting is to measure brain creatine levels, you need an MRI for the brain, which is MRS. There's only a few labs that have that. And there's only probably been about a handful of studies, maybe 10, that have looked at this in a whole wide variety of populations and look at the variability. So unlike muscle, which is pretty robust, we do not know a consistent dosing or dosing protocol to consistently elevate creatine in the brain. And it may come down to the biological stressors that you personally are feeling. So one of the big issues, unlike muscle, which acts as a vacuum and sucks up all the creatine from the blood-brain barrier, which is very important, is very protective. And unfortunately for us, the blood-brain barrier lacks these doorways, which are transporters. You need a doorway to allow creatine from the bloodstream into the brain. But to get across this blood-brain barrier, unfortunately, unlike muscle, these astrocytes do not have the ability to take up creatine. It's only the oligodendrocytes. So again, you're having a reduced or blunted ability to take creatine from the blood after you eat it or synthesize it from the liver to get across this blood-brain barrier. And that might help explain some of the variability findings we're seeing when people take creatine and or increase creatine through the diet. But it's important to note it can get in, but it's a lot slower. So that's why maybe higher dosages or longer dosage protocols may be needed.